Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. And special thanks to Lisa Fain for presenting to us on Want to Make a Bigger Impact, How Intentional Connections Can Boost Your Career. I'm Amy Goldstein, board member and chair of the training programs for the Legal Mentor Network. And I'm also the founder of Grace and Allen, a search and career coaching firm for attorneys. For those of you who might not be familiar, the Legal Mentor Network is a nonprofit organization focused on providing free legal mentoring to law students and junior attorneys. You can find information not only about the organization, but also how to sign up as a mentor or a mentee at legalmentornetwork.org. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A as we go along. They'll be answered if it works with the flow of the conversation. Otherwise, there will be time left at the end. And with that, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy, and welcome everybody. Just delighted to be here with all of you today. I am an attorney myself and haven't practiced law in quite some time, but I'm really passionate about our topic today, which is about intentional connections. And I want to be really clear about something. We're not talking today about networking. There's lots of classes on networking. There's lots to be said, and networking certainly is really important. But we are going to talk about building a developmental network, which is really a subset of that. And it's all rooted in mentoring. At Center for Mentoring Excellence, we work with organizations all around the world and help them to create inclusive cultures through mentoring and transform careers through mentoring. And I will tell you that, we often say that mentoring is one of the most promiscuously used words in leadership development. So I thought it would be useful today to define what mentoring is. And so as distinct really from lots of other modalities, when we think about mentoring, mentoring has three characteristics. And those characteristics are learning, reciprocity, and co-creation. Let's talk about each of those really quickly. The first is learning. We say that learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring. Without learning, it's a nice cup of coffee or a great lunch, but it is not a mentoring relationship. So that's characteristic number one. Characteristic number two is the quality of reciprocity. So we know that mentors give and mentees get, but do you also know that mentors get and mentees give? One of the most beautiful things that distinguishes mentoring from other modalities is this idea of reciprocity. And it's not just that mentors get this nice feeling of giving back. What the data and our experience at CME shows is that mentors become better leaders. They have more career satisfaction. They have more intergenerational and cultural competency. Their communication skills improve. Their skill at handling workplace conflict improves, and so much more. So we have learning, we have reciprocity, and finally we have co-creation. So co-creation is what I like to call of the funny math of mentoring, that 1 + 1 = 3. So when you're talking about one-on-one mentoring relationships, you have this funny math. What do I mean by that? You have the mentor, you have the mentee, and then you have the mentoring relationship that a mentor and a mentee co-create together by determining how they're going to govern their relationship, how they're going to interact, what their learning goals are, and what outcomes they're driving to. And this is one of the beautiful things that really distinguishes mentoring from other modalities. You know, the idea and the model of mentoring really has shifted over time, and in a minute we'll get into that shift in even more detail. But I want you to go from thinking about this Yoda model of mentoring to more of a constellation of mentoring. What do I mean by that? You know, it's so tempting to think about needing one mentor, one guru throughout your life or your career who can guide you in all things. But the truth is that Yoda does not exist. And in fact, because we are people with a multitude of interests and a multitude of strengths and a multitude of areas in which we want to learn and develop, And we need to be thinking about creating a constellation of mentors. We'll talk about this as a developmental network in a few minutes, but as you think about the model of mentoring, think about mentoring in many different forms. And and also, what I want you to know is that mentoring enhances career development. Just one fact of many to know is that when you have a mentor, you're twice as likely to be engaged with work and thriving in overall well-being. We know that mentoring is related to positive career outcomes for mentees who experience higher career satisfaction, career commitment, and career mobility. And in fact, 77% of mentees are more likely to stay in a job if they are in the mentoring relationship. Okay, let's talk about that shift of mentoring just a little bit more. Um, so rather than thinking of a mentee as a passive learner who sits at the foot of their mentor and soaks in all the information, I want you to know that in the most effective mentoring relationships, mentees are active learners. They are in the driver's seat, taking responsibility and ownership over what they want to learn, who they want to be connecting with, and what they want to learn from them, and sharing openly and providing feedback to their mentor about the learning process and what they need. And similarly, rather than being the sage on the stage or the authority in mentoring, we know that effective mentors are facilitators of learning. They're the guide on the side, helping a mentee to achieve the mentee's goals, sharing of their wisdom, but also testing that wisdom, asking questions, being curious about how things land with their mentee. And finally, the learning process, rather than being mentor directed, should be thought of as being mentee driven. Mentee driven. Okay, so one other kind of introductory piece that I want to share with you is I want you to think about this question that I get often, which is, why do we need formal mentoring? Isn't it enough to just have informal mentoring relationships? And, there is a lot of data actually on the quality of mentoring relationships when looked at independently tends to be greater in informal mentoring relationships. However, the breadth, the measurement, the access, the ROI, and the data is there only with formal mentoring relationships, not informal mentoring relationships. So rather than think about formal or informal, I'd like to invite you to think about formal and informal mentoring relationships. And by formal, I mean mentoring programs, structured mentoring initiatives. By informal, those that happen a bit more organically. So both of these are really important. And because learning is mentee driven, as mentees, as constant learners, really thinking about driving and taking initiative for forming those. But in addition to as learners to having individual agency, we know that mentoring thrives in a culture that values it. Mentoring thrives when it's part of how an organization learns and grows. And so there's both individual responsibility and organizational accountability. And LMN is a great way to participate in some of those structured, formal mentoring initiatives that can help in creating mentoring culture. So, I'm a huge fan of the musical Hamilton, and some of you know the line about the room where it happens, right? No one else was in the room where it happens. In law, we often feel the same way. How do some people get invited into the rooms, into those cases or client meetings or leadership roles while others wait outside? So what we know though is, I guess my question for you would be to think about how many of you were taught that if you work hard, if you stay focused, if you follow the rules, that success will come, right? It's true that hard work and focus and, sticking with structure is incredibly helpful, but it is not the full story. Access doesn't just come from effort, and it doesn't just come from from following the rules. It comes, and it doesn't just come from excellence or hard work. It comes from who knows you and who champions you and who helps you grow. Notice I didn't say it comes from who you know. Rather, it comes from who knows you, who champions you, and who helps you grow. This exposure to people, resources, and opportunities is responsible for the majority of career success. It's not that hard work and excellence don't matter. They are table stakes to get into the room where it happens, but they are not sufficient to do that. So doors aren't unlocked by hustle. They are unlocked by connection. I want to think also about this dichotomy, this difference between visibility and vision. Visibility is being seen. Vision is really about seeing more through others. Most of us think that what we need is visibility, that we need to be seen. But the real career growth comes from vision, from surrounding yourself with people who help you see more, by surrounding yourself with people who help you see more. So your network helps you sharpen ideas, it helps you see your blind spots and imagine possibilities that you would not see on your own. So this is where a developmental network comes in. And again, notice we're not talking about networking here. We're not talking about collecting business cards, virtual or otherwise. We're not talking about LinkedIn. Those are vehicles for creating contacts. We're talking about something more than contacts. We're talking about a subset of your contacts, a subset of your network, a web of intentional, diverse relationships that support your learning, your growth, and your impact. It's what makes the difference between surviving in your legal career and thriving in it. The difference between surviving in your legal career and thriving in it. So why do developmental networks matter in law anyway? They are not just for business development, although that's certainly an outgrowth or can be an outgrowth of having a developmental network. They drive your learning, your visibility, and your access, and they are especially critical in law's hierarchical relationship-driven culture. It's so important to move from this concept of independence, right, which is something that helps us succeed in the work that we do as lawyers, to interdependence, where we can really help to create and succeed in that vision. We know that legal careers are built on relationships, from referrals to rainmaking to leadership. But beyond business development, developmental networks help you expand your thinking. They help you navigate transitions and avoid isolation. Essentially, they're the scaffolding for long-term success. So let's look at what different types of developmental relationships are. And in a minute, I'm going to have you map your developmental network as well. So if you have the worksheet that was sent out to those who registered, you can go ahead and grab that as well. And we are also have a tiny URL link for you that I'll figure out in a moment how to post as well for you to get that that worksheet. But in the meantime, let's talk about the different types of developmental relationships. First, mentoring, which we've talked about already. We have one-on-one mentoring, group mentoring. I'll tell you about some of those different forms of mentoring in a moment. Also, coaching is a form of a developmental relationship, part of a developmental network. Finding a coach. There are some distinctions as well. I'll be happy to answer if there's questions in that regard. We know that all good mentors are coaches. All good coaches are not necessarily mentors. It's a little bit of a different skill. Having a sponsor or an advocate, a champion, is another type of developmental relationship that belongs in your network. Having a role model, this is where I call it the Oprah phenomenon. I can't even tell you the number of times I've talked to people who have said, oh, I've got a mentor. Oprah's been my mentor for years. Oprah's a great role model. And unless you know her and she knows you, and there's that idea of reciprocity and co-creation, she's not likely your mentor, more likely a role model. But again, a role model being a really critical piece of a developmental network. Having an advisor, a teacher, a manager, if the management is done well. Having a community of practice, having a community of practice, a community of people who are doing similar things to what you're doing as a way of learning, another form of a developmental relationship. And there are others as well. If others come to you, you can put them in the chat as well. Okay, so let's look for a second at the different kinds of mentoring relationships before we have you map yours. So first is a traditional mentor, right? This is what most people think of when we say the word mentoring, a hierarchical one-on-one relationship where somebody more senior mentors somebody more junior. Another kind of mentoring, another kind of mentor that belongs in your developmental network is a complementary mentor. Some people use the term reverse mentor, where somebody more junior mentors somebody more senior. You get or somebody with a different perspective as opposed to a hierarchical relationship. We're seeing this more and more in the organizational context. It is a great modality to seek out if you are somebody who's been in your field or your industry for a long time, to find a more junior person to help provide that perspective. We've seen some great organizational case studies in the work that we've done at CME, where more senior executives, more senior folks in an organization have sought out this kind of relationship and have gained a whole new perspective on ways to re-energize their career, ways to improve what's happening in the workforce. It's great exposure for the complementary mentor, who is the person who is more junior, and great knowledge gained and add for the mentee. A peer mentor, right? So again, there's no hierarchical relationship, but somebody who is that is lateral. That can happen one-on-one or in groups. We're seeing that again more and more. We just came back concluding an engagement where we were kicking off a peer mentoring structure for an association of women in real estate who are looking to have kind of this community of practice, but in a more formal learning context. And we're seeing that more and more in all sorts of different organizations, including law firms. And then group mentoring. Usually in group mentoring, it's a one-to-many model where there's one mentor to many mentees, as opposed to the peer mentoring where everybody's lateral. Okay. Let's talk about how to build your own developmental network. We know that no single mentor can meet all of your needs. And a developmental network, as I said, it's more than just a contact list. It's this rich constellation of people supporting your learning, growth, and career. So think about it as this web of diverse relationships where each plays a different role in your professional or personal life. Some people in your network will challenge you. Others will cheer you on. Some will open doors. Others will help you navigate difficult decisions. So you might have a coach who helps you reflect and plan, a connector who introduces you to opportunities, a sponsor who advocates for you behind closed doors, or a peer who's walking the same path and providing mutuality of support. So the truth is that no single mentor can fulfill all those roles, and that's why this network is so important. And it's also dynamic. It will evolve and change and be resilient over time. So you are at the center of your constellation. You learn and grow from many different relationships. And I want to invite you to think expansively about who belongs in your developmental network. Don't just look at the org chart. Look sideways, diagonally, even externally to your firm, to your industry. Former colleagues, professors, friends, industry peers, they all have something to offer. So with this, I want to invite you to pull out the worksheet. There is a QR code here on the slide for you to get that if you need it. There's also a link, I believe, in the chat for you to click on that if you don't already have it. I'm just going to pause for a moment to allow you to grab that and I'll also, at the moment while I'm doing that, take a quick look at the Q&A and see if there's anything that's arisen. No. Okay. All right. So take a minute and pull those sheets out. And I'd like to invite you to put your name in the middle. This is the easiest part of the whole process. Okay. Put your name in the middle. Now, for the purpose of this worksheet, I'm going to ask you to think about 4 life components or roles that you play. So you might have, if you're in a law firm, you might have associate, you might have senior partner, you might, or you might even break it down further. You might have something related to your legal practice. You want to learn more about this particular, your expertise in employee benefits or in bankruptcy or what have you, and your people management responsibilities. And you may also choose for one of these 4 corners a personal role. So for me, it might be, might have entrepreneur, and I might have community volunteer, and I might have parent, or what have you. But pick 4 life components or 4 areas in which you identify learning opportunities and populate those in each of the 4 corners of your sheet. Excellent. Now, what I'd like you to do is to pick one just that you'll think about just for the purpose of our conversation here this morning, our session here this morning. Pick one that's resonant for you. And you'll see on the line that's leading up from your name to that life component, you see the question, what do I know? And this, I want you to think about in the spirit of, as you're thinking about creating developmental relationships, there will be things that you can give and offer and strengths that you have that you may want to even amplify. And so in that area, write down what you know well in that area, right above the line. What do you know well related to that particular role? For example, I was in practiced employment law. Maybe for me, it was I knew a lot about EEO laws, mediation, right? So in my life component, it might have been expert in EEO, and on the top, it would have been what I know well is a lot about how effectively mediating cases. On the bottom, right underneath, where in that area do you want to develop? What in that area do you want to learn? On the top, what do you know well? On the bottom, what do you want to learn? And by the way, what you want to learn could be very much related to or an amplification of what you know well. It doesn't just have to be a weakness. It could be an amplification of a strength as well. Okay. Now, above where it says, what do I know? I want you to list, it's anywhere between 1 and 5 core connections, people who you already know in that area. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a peer, maybe it is another attorney who you've appeared with, against, what have you. Who do you know in that area who is a strong or a good potential connection? List a few names there. I'll give you a moment to do that. And then below the line, again, 1 to 5 people who you do not yet know. Now, you may be saying, I don't yet know who they are. So how can I put their name there? So maybe there's somebody who you admire and you want to connect with who you know of, but you don't yet know. But maybe you want to put in there the knowledge that they have or the role that they play of the contact whom you don't yet know. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay. Obviously, this is a process that's repeatable for each of the other areas, and we are all complex beings who probably have more than four life components, so you can duplicate the sheet as well. But what do you do with this now? So as you think about the people who are your core connections, think about the nature of your current relationship with them and whether and how you might turn that into a developmental relationship. A mentor, a coach, a sponsor, an advisor, a community of practice, an accountability partner, um, and who you may approach. And similarly, of people you don't yet know, how would you find them? Who do you know who might know somebody who? And how can you start to take action in order to start to build connections in the life components that matter to you the most so that you can create these developmental networks? Some call this a personal board of advisors, and I would suggest that this is broader than a personal board of advisors, which is really one form of a developmental network. This is creating a constellation of people who are invested in you and in whom you are invested. And lest you think, for those of you who are junior or newer in your career, that you have nothing to offer, let me invite you to think about it differently. We know, those of us who have been around for several decades in our careers now, that having a sounding board, having somebody to learn from us who wants to, who's curious about their own path, and having that benefit for mentors that I mentioned earlier can be really transformational. So it is as much of a give to approach with intentionality and narrowed focus and curiosity for a mentor as it is take for you as a mentee. I'm just going to pause for a second and give you a second to do anything final with that area of the chart that you'd like to do and identify just one action at least that you can take to nurture your developmental network in that particular area. And what I'd love for you to do is to name for yourself a role in your developmental network that you would like to fill. What's missing in that area for you? Do you need a challenger, a connector, a role model, a coach, a mentor, a peer mentor, a complementary mentor? When you name the gap, you can then go see it. Then you can then go seek it. And you can use the map that we just filled in to go ahead and do that. And as you look at that developmental map, I want you to think about, what did you notice? Here are some common gaps. Over-reliance on one type, a coach, a mentor, a peer, a manager, and so forth. Missing cross-discipline or cross-generational connections. In the organizational development, leadership development space, we're talking a lot now about the 4 to 5 generations in the workplace and the way that this is changing the landscape of our work. This is true in the legal realm as much as it is in the non-legal realm, and the importance of having those cross-generational, cross-discipline connections as a way to create not just career satisfaction, but to expand possibility and innovation and and really to have that vision and have people help you see more that we talked about before. Are you missing external voices? Are you missing digital voices? Are you missing non-digital voices? These are common gaps that you might see in those relationships. And I'm just going to pause for a second. Excellent. Okay. So what makes these relationships work? What makes these developmental relationships work? Once you find somebody and you start to develop, to form or to suggest a developmental relationship, we want to make sure that you are taking the time to build trust. This requires care, intention. It requires taking the time to have the curiosity about one another and bridging differences. It requires intentionally talking about the parameters of the relationship and what it is you want to seek out of it. It requires the willingness to have mutual learning, which requires vulnerability and sharing. It requires diversity of thought and naming that diversity of thought and being curious about it and respectful of it rather than judgmental of the differing point of views. And significantly, it requires consistency. It requires showing up time and again and staying in relationship with intentionality to begin to have these relationships take the form that you want. In all likelihood, as you start to seek out some of these developmental relationships, you're not going to create the structure and the intentionality in the first meeting or two that's going to transform it into a developmental relationship. So the consistency of connection and relation and being in relationship will help you form these developmental relationships. A good developmental relationship, we know, challenges you, but it also believes in you as well. So how do you do that? Well, I was talking with Amy just before the call. We were talking about geography and weather and geography specifically, because it's very cold January at the moment. But more generally, I was mentioning that I grew up on the East Coast, spent a bunch of time in the Midwest, and I now live in the Pacific Northwest. And I was introduced when I moved here about a decade ago to the Pacific Northwest, the phenomenon of a Pacific Northwest stop sign. So those of you who are from the Pacific Northwest may know what I mean, or those of you who are from the East Coast and have moved to the Pacific Northwest may know what I mean. So what happens at a Pacific Northwest stop sign? Everybody approaches the stop sign, and instead of the first person automatically stopping and then going through the stop sign, and everybody looks around and says, "You go, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go." And they wait until somebody eventually steps on the gas and everybody else gets angry and makes a gesture at the person who had the nerve to go first. So what is the relevance here? Well, what is required of you as you enter into these developmental relationships, whether you are a mentor or a mentee, a coach or a client, a peer, or an advisor, an advisee, a sponsor, or the sponsee, or the protege. What is required of you is the opposite of a Pacific Northwest stop sign. We have to normalize and encourage and invite one another to move first. Move first by sharing of your challenges. Move first by requesting the intentionality of the relationship. Because if we move first, we are all creating agency and ownership over creating the parameters for the relationship. So if there is one step, it is this idea of stepping into the vulnerability of creating a new relationship that is based on learning and really having this move first mentality. Okay, so what I want to invite you to do is to identify 3 people in your mentoring constellation, 3 people in your mentoring constellation who you will either work with to strengthen that relationship and create some intentionality around it, or seek out to form a developmental relationship. Name the kind of relationship that you want to form with them. Name, if you don't yet know the person, how will you go about finding who that person is? But identify three people or even three spots in your developmental network, your mentoring constellation today. We'll give you just a minute to do that. Yeah, and I want to just point out that Crystal has put in the Q&A box that you can sign up with the Legal Mentor Network here to start building your network. That's a great spot. So I don't know that you'll be able to click on that link, but you certainly can copy and paste that into your um, uh, into your chat or what have you. So that's a great place to start. Thanks for adding that, Crystal. Okay. So, I like to talk about these three ways to really build your network beyond just your developmental map. Remember that you want to be curating diverse perspectives, making sure that as you look at the folks who are currently in your constellation and those who you seek to add, that there is diversity of identity, diversity of background, diversity of experience, diversity of generation, diversity of area of practice, or maybe even milieu of of where you are practicing. Connect and then synthesize your insights. Really share with one another, share with the folks with whom you have these developmental relationships, what it is you want to learn and what it is you are learning along the way. And then connect the dots between what you're learning in those various relationships as well. Connect the dots, synthesize knowledge, and then apply them what you're learning, share those insights, paying the mentoring forward, paying the development, the learning forward, and expand, continue to expand your network. I want you to think about the developmental network as dynamic, as changing over time as your needs change. The relationships may evolve from one form of a developmental relationship to another. But really expanding and allowing it to morph is really critical to the ongoing success and the durability of those relationships. So if you want to make a bigger impact, it's important that you build relationships that grow with you. And you can do that really by analyzing your developmental network and those relationships and seeking out different ways and different roles within those networks. I'm going to pause because I intentionally left time for questions, but rather than just Q&A, let's call it Q&I, questions and insights, because I'd love to hear from you in the Q&A box what insights you've had from this content, what you noticed as you filled out your developmental network, or what questions you have about mentoring, about developmental networks in general. So let's think about it as questions and insights, as well as just I'm happy to answer what questions you have. Let me give you a moment to share any questions that you have in the Q&A. One question while you're thinking about it, one question that I get asked a lot is, okay, I've identified somebody who I think would be a good mentor or I think would be a good sponsor. How do I make the ask, right? How do I go about creating that connection? And I often tell people, we'll use a mentor as a shortcut here as we're talking about the answer, that when you have a conversation with a potential mentor, you're not going to start out with, will you be my mentor? Right? It's like asking for marriage on the first date. It's too much. Instead, you might say something like, look, I'm looking to build my expertise in this particular area. I want to learn more about employee benefits, and I know that you really have some leadership in that. Could we spend a little bit of time where I could ask you some point at some, some intentional questions because I have some curiosity about it. And you can determine during that conversation whether there is interest, ability, chemistry, whether there's a fit, and you'll learn something to boot. You won't yet be able to label the relationship, but I'm not sure that matters as much as the connection. And then following up with what it is you learned and getting together again. And eventually you can say, look, here's what I learned from you. I would love it if we could, uh, would you be open to having some, to having a mentoring, more mentoring conversations? Here's what I think that would look like. How does that sound to you? And then you're starting to set the framework for those kind of conversations as well. What else is coming up for you in terms of insights or what you noticed in terms of gaps in your developmental network or what steps you might take to build the relationships that grow with you? Can you give a few ways to break the ice? Sometimes it feels challenging in different environments, conferences, in-person networking. I seem to find working together is the easiest approach to connecting, but you need the additional arsenal to diversify. Yeah. So, uh, I think this is such an important question, Janet, because it really is important to have connection before content, really to be able to explore what the chemistry is, if you will, and as you say, to break the ice. And we usually start with the small talk, right? The lobby, I call them the lobby level conversations, right? You're not going to approach somebody in the lobby and ask them their views on healthcare reform. You're talking about the weather or the Bears game or what have you, right? So you want to you obviously start with initial, what might be surface level conversation, and then have a curiosity conversation. So, I am really something like, gosh, I'm really curious your views on this, or, you can share something that you are interested in, or a hobby, or a lesson that that you learned. I am a book person, so I will usually use the book that I'm reading to break the ice, or are you reading anything great, or what have you listened to recently, that kind of thing. And then you can get curious about those topics. So that's a really great way to do that is pick an interest that you have, but also something that you've learned. Or I also often ask the question, what's keeping you up these days, right? What's taking up space in your brain these days? Humor is a really great way to do that as well. And if others have other tips as well in this collective room, you can add those as well. It's a great question, Janet. Thank you for that. What other questions or insights? How do you see the applicability of this in your work? It's interesting. One of the things that we get a lot at CME is I don't have time for this. I'm so busy. It's so overwhelming, right? And yet, what we find and what the data shows is that having these developmental relationships are a way to battle the overwhelm because you start to have conversations that help you prioritize, that help you see things more clearly. The best developmental relationships are sounding boards and safety nets and laboratories to try out ideas, to figure out how do you take the things that are on your plate and find what's essential and use those to learn and to develop as well. Okay, so I would love to hear from you in the Q&A what was most useful for you today before I give you one last what you can do, some action steps.
I was going to chime in, Lisa, while we're waiting for someone to type and say, I loved the point about um, starting softly as opposed to jumping right in with the will you be my mentor, talking about what you just said about things sometimes feeling a little overwhelming in terms of not really having the time. That whole idea of building things organically, softly, asking about an interest, the break the ice stuff. You don't have to build the whole relationship overnight. And so I love that part of it, that you have time for that quick, hey, I saw you wrote about this and I have a similar interest, or just something very small, just to have that relationship move ever so slightly forward, and you keep it going that way, and then it grows from there.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, for that. We often think about these kind of conversations as an apartment building, right? And we talked about the lobby level conversations. You earn the right to go up in floors in terms of the levels of intimacy, right? And so you have to take kind of that one step at a time. And it is that consistency of showing up, the intentionality of it being a learning relationship, using open-ended curiosity questions that get you to determining, is this the right person? Is what's the learning goal here? Is there a learning fit, and not just basing it on chemistry either? So thanks for pointing that out as well.
And also,
Okay.
just along those same lines, I also love the everybody has something to offer point,
Yeah.
that it's never a one-way street, that you always can give feedback or thoughts or something that is valuable to someone who's technically more knowledgeable than you.
Yeah, 100%. And the data really, really supports that. I mean, mentors get so much out of these conversations. That's why complementary mentoring has really taken off, is, a lot of relationships that start out as traditional hierarchical mentoring become this kind of complementary mentoring as well, where mentors will say, I learned so much. I got a whole new perspective on how this truth about these career truths that I thought were so true aren't so true, or I can think about things differently, or I have exposure to new people and ways of doing things in my firm or my company or what have you, that I didn't otherwise know. And so it's really exciting to see how
Yeah,
that how that.
we see that in the Legal Mentor Network all the time. The mentors are all helping each other out the same way, as much, I should say, as the mentor-mentee relationships are helping each other out. It really is just a wonderful cyclical experience.
So it's really generative. It's fun. It's really fun to see. Okay, let me leave folks with just some ideas about how to put this in action. Um, and still open for questions or insights as we go forward. First is continue to map your network, your developmental network, whether it is through with mentoring, with coaching, with sponsoring. Think through who your connections are with the intentionality of how is it serving what a learning need is, or a role that I play is. Obviously, there's not enough spaces on the developmental map that we gave you for the roles that you have or the people that you know, but you can use this as a start to think about what you know, which is part of the give, what you're looking to learn, which is part of the get as well. So continue to mapping your network. Use a new modality. Whether if you have high reliance on coaching or on conversations with your manager or your managing partner or what have you, think about using it with intentionality, seeking a sponsor, seeking a mentor, finding a coach, finding a peer community, certainly getting involved and finding a mentor through LMN, right? Use that modality as well. Ask one deep question. This goes to Janet's question in the Q&A, right? Find a question that you're curious about that goes to one of your learning needs. Really identify that and ask that question. Ask it once, ask it twice, but ask it with intentionality in the coming weeks and see where that leads you on in terms of forming a developmental relationship or in terms of new ideas. You may find a new connection, you may find a new idea, but that kind of curiosity will help lead you to forming other relationships. And then if you have an existing relationship that you think can evolve into a developmental relationship, or you have a developmental relationship that doesn't have clarity around what it looks like and you want that clarity, clarify those expectations. You can always use this as an excuse. I went to this webinar and I learned about developmental relationships. here are some types. What do you think we got? And how can we improve on what it is that we have? If you are clarifying those expectations with your potential mentor, your potential mentee, your peers, you'll find that some of these developmental relationships will start to form organically as well because you've started to create that understanding and that intentionality around it. And finally, thank you for being here today. If there's additional resources that we can provide for you, feel free to visit our website. We've got lots of free stuff that gives you additional resources on mentoring. And I hope that you took something out of this webinar that really helps you build your own developmental network and furthers your learning and enriches your career satisfaction and your professional and your personal life.
Lisa, thank you so much. This has been so informative and really just great building blocks for everyone to get to the next level, whether they're starting out or in the middle of developing their network and relationships. Oh, do we have a? Oh, we got thank yous. Okay. Just making sure we didn't miss the last question. So again, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will have this recording if you want to go over the information again up on our YouTube channel. It's the Legal Mentor Network there, and it should be up in the next day or so. And then please stay tuned. Our next webinar will be March 4th at noon Eastern. The topic is how to get a job. And so thank you all again. Have a great rest of the day.
Hi, everyone.